Hello, welcome to another episode of Forgotten Cemeteries of the Pacific Northwest. Today we're visiting Crooked Finger Cemetery, located in Scotts Mills, Oregon, Marion County. I want to say this is our second Marion County cemetery. I think Whiskey Hill Cemetery was our other one. Alternative name, Find a Grave user mentions it's Noble Cemetery, but I couldn't find anything in the Oregon Burial Site Guide for that reference. So let's go meet some of the local residents and hear their story. As we approach the cemetery, there's a few thank yous to throw out. First would be Lois, Vice President of Scotts Mills Area Historical Society. Very cool individual who was nice enough to allow me to visit the cemetery and do my little documentary. And through Lois, I got to talk to an individual named Skip, who is trying to revitalize this cemetery. Similar to Johnny Edwards at Lafayette Masonic Cemetery, Skip is in the process of writing a grant to fix up this forgotten abandoned cemetery we're about to visit. And he's the guy for it. I talked with him on the phone, and he renovated Lone First Cemetery in the Portland area at one point. He's a pretty knowledgeable guy and has a real passion for cemeteries. From my understanding, 4 to 5 dedicated individuals come down and clean up the headstones in the cemetery. So this is one that's trying to hang on due to the efforts of these individuals. But if you're in the area and want to help, it might be a good idea to contact Scotts Mills Area Historical Society and see if you can volunteer and help with those processes. In addition, you can donate to the museum, as they are a non-profit organization. So every little bit helps them. And I'll put a link below to their website so you can get in touch with them if you're interested. All right, a little bit about the history of this cemetery. It's got a rough one. That seems to be our our MO on this channel, right? So we have an establishment date of all over the place. Oregon Burial Site Guide says 1866. Hopefully you can see the sign up there that says 1868. Find a Grave says 1843 with 3 or 4 burials indeed before 1864. So pretty old cemetery, but kind of all over the place. We got 0 to 25 burials per the Oregon Burial Site Guide. Find a Grave is showing around 15 memorials added so far to give you an idea. However, in talking to Skip in my research, I don't think we'll ever truly know how many people are buried here, and you're about to find out why. Cremains were added in the early 2000s, and there's been some rogue burials from my understanding. And I believe Skip said that he made a headstone for one individual, so hopefully we'll get to see that today. Time and nature have not been kind to this cemetery. In 1978, a report showed logging operations in the area destroyed the cemetery. I guess trucks literally just drove right over the area without a care, and I'm guessing that's when the headstones got pretty destroyed. On top of that, individuals were taking the headstones and putting them on their porches like decorations. I guess there used to be some type of iris painting here, and after 1978 you could still see it. However, in 1989, the same person that visited in 1978 said the iris painting was missing. Unsure if anyone took it to preserve it, or maybe it's just sitting in someone's barn or garage at this point. Who knows what happened to it? I did ask Skip and Lois about that, and they said they were unaware of any existing iris painting, so who knows where that went to. There's only one headstone remaining from my understanding. I guess we'll see when we do a little walkthrough. Also, there was reports of Native American graves along the bluff of the cemetery. I'm unsure of those claims, and I asked Skip about that, and he's like, oh, that might be related to Maple Grove Cemetery in Scotts Mills, because there's a legend there of a Native American woman, and that'll be a future visit actually, and I'll talk about that legend there. We'll talk about the history of diphtheria, because unfortunately we have 3 children here, all from the same family, wiped out by the bacterium. We have 1 Civil War veteran, and let's hear the legend of the man himself, the Molalla chief, Crooked Finger. Alright, kind of a strange setup to the cemetery, and we'll see during the tour, but over by the fence line near the farm right here, you will find Charles William McGowan, and it just so happens, I believe he's only the only headstone standing at this cemetery. There's some other memorials that I'll show you during the tour that are interesting. He is a Civil War vet and a sergeant serving in Company E of the 1st Oregon Infantry. This would be his stepbrother's company, Fernandad O. McCown's. We talked about this before, but the Pacific Northwest Civil War vets were more dedicated to managing conflicts between pro-Confederate and pro-Union individuals, because during the Civil War, obviously, there was a lot of arguing going on. Kind of no different from today, huh? They also handled Native American attacks, escorted wagons, etc. Charles is an 1852 immigrant. Obituary said he had 10 children, but his wife's obituary said they had around 16, so they must have got along very well. His wife is not buried here. She is buried in LA in California. Apparently he was a true shot too, and I guess that's because of his Civil War experience. I also did read that there's 6 unknown McCown children buried at this cemetery before 1900. Obviously no markers that I'm seeing so far, but during the tour, who knows what we'll discover. So there's an interesting memorial over here, and if you look at the top, I don't know if you can see it, I'll show you during the tour. It does say Crooked Finger Cemetery, established in 1843. So pretty old cemetery if true. So we're more interested in Mitchell here. I entitled this section the Mitchell Boys because there are 3 young boys, ages 4, 2, and 1, all sons of William and Martha Mitchell. I read that only 3 out of their 8 children survived adulthood. Martha's father also died along the Oregon Trail in 1850. Then her grandmother died the same day. So this is a family with a ton of loss and heartache. The children all contracted diphtheria in an outbreak in 1866 and unfortunately died. Couldn't find much on that specific year, but as you know, the Oregon Trail was not kind when it came to diseases. It actually used to be one of the leading cause of childhood deaths before vaccines came into play, so diphtheria was kind of a big problem back then. So let's learn about diphtheria. It's caused by strains of bacteria that make a poison, aka toxin, spread through respiratory droplets, which I'm sure we're all familiar with by now with COVID. This disease goes right after the respiratory system mainly, but I guess it can affect the skin as well. You typically have weakness, a sore throat, mild fever, and swollen glands of the neck. To add, remember that toxin we were talking about? I guess it starts destroying the tissues of your respiratory system. Soon you get gray globs of tissue in your throat because it just starts building up as it dies, and this makes it really difficult to breathe. At a certain point, the toxin makes its way to your blood, and it's pretty much ball game from there. It destroys your heart, liver, and kidneys at that point. Fortunately for us, a vaccine was developed in the 1920s and put into effect in the 1930s, so diphtheria is pretty much unheard of these days. However, as of 2018, we still have outbreaks globally. Okay, so on this same memorial sort of section, you see several names, but we're more interested in Susan Penter. The only other individual that really had information other than our Civil War veteran. Her mother and father were 1843 immigrants to Oregon. Her father was a Civil War vet serving in Company G of the 1st Oregon Infantry. Now, I'm assuming based on Susan's estimated birth year, which is 1860, her biological mother was Matilda Caroline Keizer Penter, because Susan's parents got divorced in 1872, but coincidentally, her father remarried in 1872. Not going to touch that. But the town of Keizer, Oregon is named after Thomas D. Keizer, who was Susan's mother's father. Thomas was instrumental in forming Oregon's territorial government and statehood. In addition, he was the state's first militia commander and founder of the Oregon National Guard. You can visit that today and see a cool little monument in town in his honor. What's odd, Thomas's final resting place is apparently a big mystery. Nobody knows where he's buried. In fact, a lot of the Keizers seem unknown in my readings. From what I read, the Keizer land claims were near the Willamette River. Susan is buried quite a distance from that area at this cemetery, so she's about 45 minutes by car from the river. Alright, let's hear the lore behind Crooked Finger. Thought I'd give a little background because you hear the name and it sounds unique, and I just kind of stumbled upon this cemetery in this area. You won't find Crooked Finger on any Google Maps. I'm trying to remember, I think I was searching through my Oregon Burial Site Guide and I was like, that's a unique name. So the name originates from a Molalla chief named Loshuk. I guess when he was a boy playing around with a rifle, it went off, disfiguring his hand. Therefore, that's how he got his name Crooked Finger. I found this anthropology write-up on the chief, and I'll link it below because it was an awesome source for what I'm about to talk about. That person did an awesome job writing that up. Crooked Finger is described as not being a fan of the American settlers in this area, go figure, and would harass them given any opportunity. However, I did read that the Molalla did work with the community and farmers and had a pretty good relationship with the townspeople overall. Some reports say the chief drank heavily and was a big fan of the Hawaiian rum called Blue Ruin. The only bit of information I could find on blue ruin was in March of 1838, there was a new law regulating the sale of blue ruin. So someone wanted control of it, obviously. It must sound pretty popular and profitable. So the article goes on to say that Crooked Finger was the principal chief over the local tribes in the Dickey Prairie and Santiam Basin during the 1840s and early 1850s. There's an area called Crooked Finger Prairie, and I guess that's where his tribe hung out most of the time. So if you guys remember, we covered an individual called Ralph Gear at Mount Hope Cemetery. I know that was a long video. It's an hour long, and I don't blame you if you watched it in its entirety. It's okay. Sometimes I ramble on too much. But he did write about Crooked Finger at one point, and it reads, Crooked Finger, a desperate Molalla Indian, said to be a chief. At all events, he controlled the Molallas and a band of clothmouths. That he'd been infesting this part of the valley for several years and was continually traveling from the Molalla to the Santiam on the Klamath Trail and insulting settlers by ordering the women in the absence of the men to cook him a meal of victuals at any time of the day. And as all the settlers on that trail were newcomers, he sometimes succeeded in scaring them into obeying him by his gestures and threats. He said all the brave men had gone to fight the Cayuses, and he can do just as he pleased. He and his band of Klamaths drove one man from his land claim. End quote. So, back to Crooked Finger, I sort of sympathize with him, as in 1851, I guess when the settlers learned of the terms of a treaty that would allow the tribes to live next to them in the Willamette Valley, they complained to Congress and postponed the treaty. Crooked Finger apparently demanded payment up front for his land at that point. He was sort of seeing the writing on the wall with the things going on, that things just weren't going to work out for his people. And people were starting to notice he had very good understanding of how far he can push the terms. He was becoming educated as time went on. In 1853, Crooked Finger would enter the house of Fred McCormick and apparently started ordering his wife around while Fred was gone. Fred would eventually come home and try to tell him to take a hike, leave my wife alone. Crooked Finger would refuse, but would be forced out of the house, and Crooked Finger would break down the door, allegedly having a gun with him as well. At this point, Fred McCormick had no choice and shot the chief dead. So the article does go on to say that the chief was most likely buried under an old oak tree by the historic Crooked Prairie School. However, that school closed in the 1970s, is now a private residence. To add, the tree was removed at some point, and I believe the author mentioned documents on the Molalla people are kind of scarce. Another story says he died near the Grand Ronde Agency, which is about an hour west from here, I believe. So there's a bit of a debate where the final resting place is of the chief. But overall, a forgotten cemetery with legends and lore and a lot of interesting history. Not well known to the state of Oregon, I think, in my readings. Interesting place. Alright, time for the tour. If you do come in, you'll have like a little fence as your guide to the right of you. I don't know if you could see it. It's kind of sticking up over there. Just keep walking straight. Comes out to sort of an open area, but you won't see any headstones. It'll kind of trick you, and you'll be like, where are the headstones at? So just keep walking in. Use that fence as your guide. Keep looking to the left. And this would be my recommendation. You have 3 trees there. That'll be your marker, your indication where to find the headstones, or headstone I should say, because there's only one remaining. But we saw that nice little memorial that someone built, and that's cool. So they have some type of remembrance in their name. Find our Civil War vet down over here by the fence line next to the farm, which I'm guessing is the only remaining headstone left of the cemetery original. So I'm guessing Skip made this nice little memorial. It says Crooked Finger Cemetery, established in 1843. And some of the known individuals that are buried here. Talked about the Mitchell boys, we talked about Susan Penter. And gone but not forgotten. I did see this. 2 young girls. Like I said, it's definitely forgotten one, but luckily Skip's trying to do something about it. and I found this little headstone over here, forgotten, which is ironic given the name of my channel. There's another memorial over here that was built. So we got Corrigan. So even though this cemetery was abandoned for many years, you could still see there's somewhat activity, but I think that's more of cremains that are spread on the cemetery. But pretty unique memorial, I like it. Speaking of rogue burials, hopefully the camera shows up, but you can also see like a line there and a line there and a line there. There's like a hump almost. In those humps there's a bunch of rocks. So this might be one of those rogue burials that Skip was talking about long ago. I don't know if it was just one case or several cases, but it's a little it's a little striking. Like this one right here, you can definitely see there's purposely a pile of rocks with no name. But that is your cemetery tour. Just not a whole lot left, unfortunately, but there's some efforts going on to remember the individuals buried here who once had headstones, and unfortunately I think that logging incident did a lot of them in. But I hope you enjoyed the legends and lore of Crooked Finger and the cemetery. Had quite a bit. If you have any other recommendations for cemeteries to visit in Oregon or even Washington, feel free to comment below. Hope you enjoyed the video, and have a great day. Stay safe out there.